Since the beginning of time, they've captivated the imagination of civilizations all around the world. Everywhere around you, hidden in plain sight, encoded into art, religion, philosophy, architecture, and fairy tales, there's a secret knowledge of one of the world's greatest mysteries, known only to a select few. Revered as a medicine by some, seen as portals to another dimension by others, feared and vilified by others still, this is the lost history of sacred mushrooms. Cave paintings in the Saharan desert, dating back to the end of the Paleolithic era, depict the use of mushrooms in a shamanic context. Similar rock paintings in Spain, created around 6,000 years ago, suggest that the mushroom Psilocybe hispanica was used during certain religious rituals near Villa del Humo. And there are other examples that appear to depict the use of psychoactive mushrooms, like women with Amanita muscaria for heads. Now, some researchers believe that the use of psychedelic mushrooms may have even led to the invention of painting more than 40,000 years ago. This belief comes in part from the common occurrence of patterns known as Turing instabilities by prehistoric artists thousands of miles away from one another who never met. These spiraling, swirling patterns are common hallucinations after the ingestion of psychoactive substances. It is almost certain that mushroom use by prehistoric cultures began even long before that time, but we have just not found the adequate physical evidence to support it yet. A popular proponent of this belief was the ethnomycologist and philosopher Terence McKenna, who proposed the stoned ape theory in his seminal 1992 book, Food of the Gods.
It is necessary in evolutionary theory to account for the dramatic emergence of the human neocortex in this very narrow window of time. So what happened? I think that the answer lies in diet, generally, and in psychedelic chemistry in particular. I think that as the African continent grew drier, we were forced out of the ecological niche we had evolved into, which was we were canopy-dwelling primates, insectivores. But when we came under nutritional pressure, we were flexible enough. Our flexibility, we began to experiment with a new kind of diet and to leave the trees and explore the new environment of the grassland. And evolving concomitantly in the grassland were various forms of ungulate animals, double-stomached animals whose manure is the ideal medium for mushrooms, many of whom produce psilocybin.
McKenna believed that the increased visual acuity provided by low-dose psilocybin allowed for improved hunting performance by these early hominids. Additionally, he believed that the evolution of language was intrinsically tied to use of psilocybin, which can cause vocal outbursts known as glossolalia in high enough doses, and may have led to syntactical outpouring of ideas. Finally, McKenna believed that the sexual arousal caused by moderate doses of psilocybin likely led to increased reproduction, which was advantageous to the survival of the species. He pontificated that psilocybin's nature would have led to an orgiastic culture, not preoccupied by paternity, which would have resulted in collective egalitarian child-rearing, a step away from the patriarchal leanings of most primates, and closer in behavior to our nearest living relatives, bonobos. While McKenna's theory on human evolution is highly controversial, there is evidence to back some of his views. For instance, primates are known to flip cow patties in search of insects, so it stands to reason that our ancestors would have also found the mushrooms hiding beneath. Similarly, anthropologists have documented use of psilocybe mushrooms by the tribespeople of the western highlands of New Guinea, whose lifestyle is not unlike that of our early ancestors. Whether McKenna's beliefs were correct or not, early man experimented with various sources of food, clothing, and medicine, and undoubtedly happened upon psilocybe at some point during this process of trial and error. It's impossible to know for certain when all this took place, but if evidence is any indication, mushrooms have been used by anatomically modern man right from the very start. The earliest direct empirical reference to psychedelic mushrooms comes from The Record of Diverse Matters by Zhang Hua. Written in 290 CE, this manuscript, also known as Bawu Zi, is not a materia medica. Instead, it is a document of supernatural phenomena and natural wonders of ancient China. It described a mushroom that caused its consumer to burst into uncontrollable laughter. We now know this particular mushroom as Laughing Jim. Despite this being the first verifiable written record of psychedelic mushrooms, there are a myriad of examples that appear to reference these substances before it. Take, for instance, various crowns depicted in ancient Egyptian art. Some researchers believe that these are representative of psilocybe mushrooms, and wearing such headwear was indicative of having achieved enlightenment via the mushroom, an experience that was reserved for the higher class. Some have even argued that Egyptian ankhs, symbolic of life, are stylized representations of mushrooms. Though there's no definitive evidence to suggest that this is so, there is imagery that appears to show the ankh being fed to the god Osiris, the god of spiritual rebirth, whose spirit is said to reside in barley, a known substrate for psilocybe. Other Egyptian hieroglyphs share a striking resemblance with hallucinogenic mushroom species as well. These parasol-shaped carvings, typically referred to as an unidentified plant by mainstream Egyptologists, are referred to in the pyramid texts as a golden plant with magical properties used only in the most sacred celebration of the gods. What's more, the Egyptian Book of the Dead discusses the very secretive way in which such rituals were conducted. Let no stranger anywhere have knowledge of it. Do not speak about it to any man. Do not repeat it. Let no eye see it. Let no ear hear it. Let no one see it except thyself, and him who taught it to thee. Let not the multitude know of it, except thyself and the beloved friend of thy heart. But this highly ritualized use of mushroom sacraments is not only true of ancient Egypt. When we come back, we'll explore evidence of similar rituals occurring well into the modern era. When people discuss magic mushrooms, they're most often talking about psilocybin-containing species. These mushrooms work on 5-HT, or serotonergic receptors, in your brain, just like the other classical psychedelics, such as LSD and DMT. But there is an entirely separate variety of hallucinogenic mushrooms as well. Mushrooms like Amanita muscaria and the similar Amanita pantherina contain ibutenic acid and the GABA agonist mucimol, a sedative hypnotic and hallucinogenic compound. These Amanita, or fly agaric mushrooms, have a well-documented history of use in Siberia. There's increasing support for the theory that the modern Santa Claus myth, and Christmas traditions in general, evolved out of Siberian shamanic rituals. Once again, Terence McKenna put it best.
an example of how a very ancient folkway can be incorporated into our culture without us even realizing it, and is provided by discussing Amanita muscaria. If you go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and you look up Santa Claus, they'll tell you that it has to do with St. Nicholas, and it got started in the 11th century, and but when you look at the Santa Claus story, it's a perfect mythologium to analyze from this point of view, because look what's going on with Santa Claus. First of all, Santa Claus's colors are red and white, the colors of the Amanita muscaria for sure. Santa Claus lives at the North Pole. What does this mean? It means that Santa Claus lives at the Axis Mundi, where Yggdrasil, the magic world ash of Welsh mythology, has taken root. Santa Claus flies. This is what shamans do. Santa Claus is the master of the reindeer, the animal most associated with the Amanita muscaria. Santa Claus is aided in his work by troops of elves. And what is the work of Santa Claus? To build toys for children. Remember the DMT things saying, look at this, look at this. Well, those were off-duty elves, clearly. So here are all the motifs. And I believe that for children in our culture, that all the Christer stuff is not what Christmas is about. Christmas is about standing in front of the tree on Christmas morning with the gifts arrayed and the twinkling lights on. Well, that tree is the tree that the Amanita muscaria forms its symbiotic relationship to. It's always spruce or pine that it has a mycorrhizal relationship to. So the number of motifs relating Santa Claus to a cult of Amanita muscaria, there's almost nothing but relational motifs there. And yet if you suggest this to people, they just back away in horror, you know.
What McKenna left out in this clip, though, is a very important property of mucimol. Unlike most drugs, mucimol is still active after being passed through the urine. Legend has it that shaman would sometimes drink the urine of reindeer who had regularly consumed amanitas, as it was considered safer than eating the mushrooms directly, having been filtered through the reindeer's bladder to remove potentially hazardous toxins. With that said, there's considerable documented evidence of shaman preparing and consuming the mushrooms directly to interface with the spirit world. The ethnomycologist R. Gordon Wasson was fascinated by these and similar rituals taking place in Scandinavia. He noted parallels between the shamanic rituals in which the Amanita held such spiritual significance and the Vedic Soma. Soma is the food of the gods described in the Rig Veda, a holy scripture to the Proto-Indo-Iranian culture that spawned both Zoroastrian and Hindu beliefs. While the identity of the specific plant used as Soma was a closely guarded secret of the ancient Brahmin, Soma's use by humans is well attested to in the Vedas. The characteristics ascribed to this concoction have long led to speculation that it was an entheogen. For instance, the Rig Veda says, "We have drunk Soma and become immortal. We have attained the light the gods discovered." Aside from this source, Soma is also mentioned in over 114 hymns in the Soma Mandala of the Rig Veda. In his book, Soma, Divine Mushroom of Immortality, Wasson outlines a case for Amanita as Soma. He pointed out that descriptions of Soma do not describe any roots, seeds, or stems, all of which mushrooms lack, but plants have. These descriptions also call Soma Hari, a word meaning dazzling or flaming, which the author interprets as a description for the color red. Some passages call Soma Tawny, meaning yellow or brown, as Amanita sometimes can be. He also points to examples from the Rig Veda that discuss urination of Soma as evidence, recalling the urine drinking of Siberian shamanism. Finally, he points to the preparation of Soma using a Soma stone, a tool used to pulverize some form of plant material to produce juice. The Sanskrit word Soma literally means to distill or extract. A similar method of preparation has been used traditionally in parts of Siberia, thus strengthening his case. Terence McKenna agreed that the Soma discussed in Hinduism and the Wama of Zoroastrianism was indeed a psychedelic mushroom, but not the Amanita variety. Instead, he believed that Psilocybin was the food of the gods discussed in the Rig Veda. His evidence? Hinduism's deep reverence for the cow. The 9th mandala of the Rig Veda calls the cow the embodiment of Soma, and as previously discussed, cow manure is a primary substrate for psilocybin-containing mushrooms. Additionally, McKenna interpreted the process of samsara, the wheel of death and rebirth in the Hindu belief system, as discussing both a literal and metaphorical death. Both instances, he believed, were informed by the psychedelic experience common to psilocybin mushrooms, an experience much unlike the hypnotic state produced by Amanita mushrooms. This new theory intrigued Wasson, who eventually changed his beliefs on the identity of Soma. Wasson came around to McKenna's theory after both men used Amanita to perpetuate mystical experience as described in the Rig Veda and failed to do so. Regardless of Soma's true identity, it is believed that the overharvesting and ecological changes to the Indian subcontinent led to Soma's scarcity. As a result, an increased focus was placed on meditation and the puja rituals of the priestly class, who would have downplayed the importance of Soma or used substitute plants before abandoning the practice altogether. A slow transition that likely would have occurred over the course of several generations. In Hinduism, the identity of Soma was generally shrouded in mystery. This is in part due to the fact that rather than depicting the actual plant, the ancient Indians anthropomorphized it into a deity, Soma. But later traditions, such as Buddhism, seem to have been a little more deliberate in their interpretation. Buddha is said to have found enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree, where he meditated for 40 days and 40 nights. In numerous examples, the Bodhi tree is stylized as a mushroom. Might this be indicative of a visionary quest undertaken by Gautama, the very event through which he became the Buddha? Whether or not artwork of the Bodhi tree is encoded with a secret knowledge of psychedelic mushrooms, there is one major event in the Buddha's life in which mushrooms play an integral role. When Buddha dies and attains parinirvana, he is liberated from the karmic rebirth, the wheel of samsara. His final meal before death, which is often credited as responsible for his death, likely consisted of wild mushrooms. The general consensus is that a misidentification of mushrooms likely led to food poisoning from which the Buddha died. Misidentification of Amanita muscaria is known to have deadly consequences, as notably illustrated in Super Mario Bros. Could it be that the mushroom he intended to eat was none other than the psychoactive Amanita, which he had consumed numerous times before? While it is unclear if Buddha attained enlightenment through the use of psychoactive substances, there are a growing number of scholars who believe a secret alchemical mixture used by the Vajrayana Buddhists could have traditionally consisted of Amanita muscaria. This is largely based on the work of Scott Doberstein. While somewhat speculative, he interprets the hagiography of the Siddha, Aryadeva, as chronicling the use of a secret elixir provided to him by Nagarjuna, a major figure in Buddhism and founder of the Middle Way. Siddhas are people in Eastern mysticism who are known to have achieved supernatural powers through meditation, yoga, fasting, and the like. But Aryadeva was unable to achieve his full potential by these traditional channels, leading Nagarjuna to introduce him to the magical elixir. In this story, the elixir and urine become almost synonymous, with both causing dead trees to spring back to life before their very eyes, hearkening back to the unique property of Amanita in which it is still psychoactive in the urine. Aryadeva is also instructed to eat a balled-up pancake on the top of a needle, an image that might intentionally evoke mushrooms. But the Vajrayana likely aren't the only Buddhists to have experience with psychedelics. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is often used as a guide for the spiritual death and rebirth that occurs during the psychedelic experience. This book, which essentially serves as an instruction manual for the use of psychedelics, and even goes on to describe what one might encounter in particular bardos, was revealed around the 12th century after it was purportedly discovered on a mountaintop. Is it possible, then, that its unknown authors were so familiar with navigating the realms of death and rebirth through the ego-death experience catalyzed by the ingestion of high doses of psilocybin? And could the archetypical tree of life found in numerous world religions be representative of the magical properties of the mushroom? So far, we have uncovered the prehistoric origins of sacramental mushroom use and its prevalence in the ancient Eastern world. Still to come, we will explore its use from ancient Greece well into the Middle Ages, as well as tackling the radical theory that Jesus Christ himself was a mushroom. All of this and more in Part 2.